Hello, Cedar Village, and welcome back to another Village Torah portion discussion with me, your host, Rabbi Drew, Director of Pastoral Care here at Cedar Village. And we are talking plagues. In last week's Torah portion, we got to experience the first seven. The first seven plagues were, I want to say delivered to the Egyptians, but they were plagued onto the Egyptians. And in this week's Torah portion, we see the final three plagues. One plague I just happened to be curious about, and I don't know how much time you have spent thinking about or otherwise considering the plague of darkness. Now, the plague of darkness, I don't know how much I've really thought about it, but you know what? Not only is it in this week's Torah portion, but I figured it would also give us some greater insight into when we get, and I know it's only a few months away, Passover Seder. So I want to look now at, let's see what the plague of darkness is. So the plague of darkness is really just 3 lines in this week's Torah portion in verses 21, 22, and 23 of chapter 10 in the book of Exodus. And here we go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where they were, but all of the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Okay. That's fascinating. There's a darkness. It's a darkness that can be touched. So there's a tangibility. So it's already different than the darkness we are used to experiencing. Usually when we think of darkness, it's just the experience of darkness normally is a visual experience. But now we get another sense that it can be felt. It can be touched. So not only that, one thing that's also really fascinating is that people couldn't see each other. So it's an extreme darkness. For 3 days, no one could get up from where they were. Lo kamu ish mitachtav. Fascinating that they couldn't get up. Now, it's unclear what's prompting that. As we'll see, as I'd like to explore with you some of the sort of the classic Jewish the medieval biblical commentators, and to check out their perspectives and their insights and their thoughts on these fascinating Torah portion discussions. And I think the thing that's also really deeply fascinating is, but the Israelites could see, they had light in their dwellings. Okay, so we're going to start off with Rashi. It's hard to ignore him. It's hard to get away with one of these without checking out Rashi. And just for a little background, Rashi it's an acronym for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He was a French rabbi born in 1040 and lived until 1105. So really a late 11th century French rabbi. Okay. So he commenting on what God tells Moses, it's an interesting language, Vayemesh Choshech, that it signifies, and the darkness shall darken them for the natural darkness to a higher degree than the darkness of night, which is the darkness of night shall become even more black and dark. It's a really dark darkness. Now there's a really long comment he has here on this verse 22. There was darkness of gloom when no man saw another during those 3 days. And there was, moreover, another period of 3 days' darkness twice as thick as this, when no person rose from their place. One who happened to be sitting when the second period of darkness began was unable to rise, and one who was then standing was unable to even sit down. Now it seems for Rashi, this inability, why couldn't they rise? Why couldn't they sit? It's because it was just so thick of a darkness that it's not simply affecting vision, but also they just couldn't move through the air. They were just stuck, really. They were sitting, they were lying, they were standing, they were stuck in that position. They really couldn't cut through. They couldn't move through that intensely thick darkness that was not simply a matter of vision, but of feeling. Okay, so Rashi continues, and he says, now why did God bring darkness upon the Egyptians? Because there were wicked people amongst the Israelites of that generation who had no desire to leave Egypt. And these died during the 3 days of darkness, so that the Egyptians might not see their destruction and say, these Israelites have also been stricken just as we have. Wow. Okay, so it's not just the Israelites that are being inflicted with this plague of darkness, but even certain ones, wicked Israelites, who, so apparently what makes them wicked is they did not want to depart. They did not want to leave Egypt. They just wanted to remain. And so they are being, they're being filtered out. They're being filtered out at this time. Okay. And God wants to sort of cover it up and say, oh, it's not as if, they didn't want and God didn't, and according to Rashi, God did not want the Egyptians to see certain Israelites, the wicked ones, or at least the ones who really did not want to depart, that were they to have seen that, they would have said, oh, it's affecting everybody versus, oh, it's just affecting us. Okay. And Rashi provides another reason. And a further reason is that the Israelites searched and saw the Egyptians' jewels. And when they were leaving Egypt and asked for their jewels, they replied, we have none at all in our possession. They answered them, I have seen it in your house, and it is in this particular place or that particular place. It's fascinating. It also, that latter piece also helps explain when the Israelites are departing from Egypt and the Egyptians give them jewelry, there seems to be no reason. There's no clear reason. So Rashi is throwing this reason, which seems to come from rabbinic midrashim. It's because the Israelites could say to the Egyptians, well, I've seen this. Well, how would you have otherwise been able to have seen this? Oh, well, I was able to get through in the darkness. It's fascinating because according to this midrash that Rashi is quoting, it's going back to the verse where it specifically says the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Now, from that verse, on the face of it, it would seem that it's a matter of certain places. It's a geographical place. But with this midrash, this rabbinic narrative expansion that Rashi is quoting, it seems to be it's not just in their dwellings, but it's wherever they dwell. Or it would almost seem to follow the Israelites around, not just in an Israelite house, they would have light, and in an Egyptian's house, they would have this suffocating darkness, this thick darkness, but also wherever Egyptians went, it was always dark, and wherever Israelites went, it was always light. So it's an interesting take that the light could sort of move with the Israelites. Now I wanted to look at a couple of quick comments by one of Rashi's grandsons. This is Rashbam. It's an acronym for Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, who lived from 1085 to 1158. So he overlapped 20 years with Rashi, his grandfather. So on verse 22, he says, what is this choshech afela? This like really, really, really darkness. He says, choshech gadol. It was really dark, really dark. And what is this not being able to, the Egyptians not being able to sort of get up, move about? And so Rashbam says, no. It's according to the plain meaning, it's from their house. The reason was that they did not know where they would be walking because they couldn't see. Now he takes it, Rashbam here takes this in an interesting direction because he's disagreeing with his grandfather. Okay, so his grandfather was saying it was so thick, the thickness prevented the walking or the getting up because It was so physically thick, one could not move. If you were sitting, you couldn't generate the strength to stand up. And if you were standing, you couldn't figure out how to get through the thickness of the physical feeling thickness of the darkness. Whereas his grandson, Rashbam, says, no, 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 no. It's because it's so dark, they couldn't leave their house. They couldn't leave their house, and it was just so dark they couldn't see. They would not know how to navigate that darkness. So they remained in their houses. Okay. It's an interesting difference. And I think for Rashbam, is it really true that it was that thick you could not physically move? Maybe you could still move around. You just couldn't leave your house. That would be incredibly difficult to walk around without being able to see where you were walking. Okay. Now, a couple of comments and insights from Ibn Ezra. So his name is Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra, and he was roughly a contemporary of Rashbam, having been born in 1089 and living until 1164. Now, both Rashi and Rashbam are French rabbis, whereas Ibn Ezra is Spanish. So he was in Spain. So what he says is, what is this? And Moses stretched forth. The Egyptians had no way of knowing that 3 days passed except through the Israelites who had light. Interesting comment, because if it's just dark for 3 straight days, how would anybody know? It's night, it's morning, it's day, it's the next day, it's the end of a day. No one, how would you know? Well, actually, Ibn Ezra says they did not. They had no way of discerning time. What day is it? Is it Tuesday? Is it Friday? They had no idea, but their Israelite neighbor, or the Israelites, did. They knew which day it was. Now, he says, now there are times when a thick darkness comes over the Atlantic Ocean, during which time it is impossible for a person to distinguish between day and night. The aforementioned occasionally lasts for as long as 5 days. I myself have been there many times. That's really fascinating. What he's saying is, is it really that impossible that for 3 days not knowing what day it is and not having light? No, I've personally experienced even for up to 5 days in the Atlantic Ocean, which is that is really neat. That is really neat to have that personal experience being shared to shed light on these biblical passages. Okay. And he also writes for people not being able to rise up from their place. He says from one's house. Okay. For where could they go without light? And that's a exact same as his contemporary Rashbam, which it's fascinating. I don't know if one got it from the other. Maybe one of them had written it down and the other saw it included in his commentary. I don't know whether maybe it was something that was being discussed at this time, that it was, well, we can't, how could we leave our houses? Now, it's also interesting because that's not what the verse does not say anything about leaving their house. This is both Rashbam and Ibn Ezra's sort of, they're moving it. They're trying to say, no. Let's be logical. Let's be reasonable about it. Let's say they can't leave their houses, but who knows? It's really difficult to see. It's an interesting move that they're both Rashbam and Ibn Ezra, who are contemporaries of each other, one living in France, one living in Spain, have the same take on this. Okay. We're going to move forward in time. We just discussed the comments of one Spanish rabbi. We're now going to talk about the comments of another Spanish rabbi, and that is Ramban, not Rambam, Ramban, Rabbi Moses, son of Nachman, and he was born in 1194, dying in 1270. So what is this? People not seeing each other nor rising from their place? What's this about? He says, the meaning thereof is that this darkness was not a mere absence of sunlight, where the sun set and it was like night. Rather, it was a thick darkness. That is to say, it was a very thick cloud that came down from heaven. So now he's making this move that it's super thick. It is for that It is for this reason that he said, stretch out your hand toward heaven to bring down from there a great darkness which would descend upon them and which would extinguish every light, just as in all deep caverns and in all extremely dark places where light cannot last, as it is swallowed up in the density of the thick darkness. Similarly, people who pass through the mountains of darkness, and I don't know if he's mentioning a specific place called mountains of darkness. In any event, they pass through the mountains of darkness, find that no candle nor fire can continue to burn at all. It is for this reason that they saw not one another, nor did they rise from any from their place. For otherwise, they would have used the light of fire. This is the intent of the verse. He sent darkness, and it became dark. It was not the usual absence of daylight above, but an extraordinary darkness as well. It is possible that it was such a very thick cloud that there was something tangible in it, as our rabbis have said. And so when he says there was a very thick cloud, that there was something tangible in it, that's a reference to not just Rashi, but the Midrashim that Rashi is quoting, as our rabbis have said. And as indeed, as it happens in the Atlantic Ocean, as Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra has already testified. So he's directly referencing the earlier Spanish rabbi, Ibn Ezra, that we just read about. Now, Ramban was born 30 years after Ibn Ezra died. So he, as you can see, was aware of his writings. They were both Spanish rabbis. So he's arguing that it's a real big, well, it's actually funny because he's now actually putting two things together. So he's saying it's not just a deep dark, he's saying there's this tangibleness, this ability to feel the darkness, the thickness of the cloud. But he says, and it's also like Ibn Ezra testified. Now, that's not what Ibn Ezra said. Ibn Ezra was not saying this was about the thickness. It was just saying it's super dark. You cannot tell day from night, night from day, which day it is. No idea. I think that's a very separate thing. But ultimately, so he was really arguing for a really thick darkness. Now, it sounds like he's not saying it's as thick as Rashi was trying to put it, that it was so thick one couldn't even move through it. I think he's saying it was an extraordinary thick darkness, not just a darkness that you can't see, but something that you really, really, really can't see through. And even fire would not even, candle, fire wouldn't be enough to see through. Okay. Now, I want to go back to a French rabbi. Okay, we've had a couple of Spanish rabbis. Now we're going to end off with another French rabbi. And this was someone who, his name is Rabbi Hezekiah ben Manoach, also known as Chizkuni, born in 1250 and died in 1310. So what's this thick darkness, he says? He says, look, Rashi commented that the Israelites were able to see, as usual, and could find where the Egyptians kept their valuables. Really fascinating midrash, so that when the time came to ask for them, they could know if they lied when claiming they did not possess certain items an Israelite had requested. This is the deeper meaning of Exodus 12:36. And the Lord had disposed the Egyptians favorably towards the people, and they lent them willingly. Okay, so now he's just explaining Rashi. What's the point of that? It's saying, why is it happening later on when they're leaving that the Egyptians would give them money and jewels and other good stuff? It's strange, and it really deserves its own separate conversation. But here he's just providing background reasoning, connecting what's going on later, why Rashi would use that midrash. Okay. Now, finally, he says there was light in the dwellings. It is noteworthy that the Torah here does not refer to the province of Goshen as it had done during other plagues, but implies that Israelites living in other parts of Egypt were also not affected by this plague. Our sages in the Midrash claim that when an Israelite entered the house of an Egyptian, he was able to see normally in that house also. Now that helps us understand the earlier comment of was that Rashi? Yeah, the earlier comments of Rashi, clearly deriving from a midrash, that it wasn't just Israelite houses have light, Egyptian lights Egyptian houses have dark, it's that it really follows around the Israelite wherever, because the language is b'moshvotam, right? So in their dwellings. Well, where is their dwelling? Is it specifically their house, or is it wherever they decide to dwell? So maybe it follows them, and so that's he's working off of that midrash. So I hope that these medieval insights, these medieval commentators' insights, are fascinating and hopefully help develop a further sense of. And it's not as if they all agreed with each other. How much was this inability for the Egyptians to move? How much of that was because it was so thick of a darkness that they could not physically move? And how much of it was simply they just couldn't leave their house? They could probably figure out how to get around in their house if it's dark. They could not see. They're probably familiar enough with where things are that they, for 3 days, can manage. But to depart from their house, it's so incredibly dark that they really couldn't manage to meander about. Like, it wouldn't make sense for them to even bother to go about. So we and some other aspects of these some of the disagreements that these medieval commentators have, but certainly I hope that they provided some interesting insights. And who knows, not only for this week, for this Shabbat, as it appears in the Torah portion, that I hope it provides insights, but also just a few months down the road when we get to Passover. So, for the Passover Seder, what does that mean, darkness? What was so bad about it? What was so severe? Okay, so it didn't seem like it necessarily killed anybody, aside from that one midrash we saw about maybe some of the Israelites who didn't want to leave Egypt, maybe that they were killed out. But aside from that, it doesn't seem, at least not from these comments, that any Egyptians died out. Wasn't necessarily a deadly plague, as we may have seen with some of the others, but that it was just so discomforting. It was so it really controlled people's lives in an uncomfortable way, and it really made them, I don't know, probably felt really powerless and really not necessarily, possibly vulnerable, certainly powerless, frustrated, unable to really do much with their lives for 3 days. And so that's what and ultimately that prompts Pharaoh to say to Moses, you know what, go take what you need and go and serve your God. Now, of course, what ends up happening is another story, but certainly for just thinking about the plague of darkness itself, I hope these were some interesting insights for you. All right. Before we go, I wanted to acknowledge that all Jewish life and programming here are due to the financial beneficence of the Jewish Home of Cincinnati. So thank you so much. And with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, for watching, and Shabbat Shalom.